Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the virtual Fleet Week of Fleet Europe. My name is Steven Schultz. I'm the editor-in-chief of Fleet Europe, your preferred fleet media. And I will be the moderator of today's webinar, in which we are going to highlight how to set up an efficient charging infrastructure for your EV fleet. The webinar is, of course, an informative one, and this means that the information shared is based on information that we have at Fleet Europe, but also that has been shared with the experts in this webinar. If you would like to reproduce information that is given in this webinar, of course, you need first to inform us, because some of the information is for this webinar only. The webinar today is sponsored and supported by ALD Automotive together with their charging partner ChargePoint. Thank you very much, ALD and ChargePoint, of supporting us in this new webinar of the Virtual Fleet Week. The webinar is the third one in a series of webinars that we organize from the 12th until the 16th of October. On your screen, you see that we already did 2 webinars before yesterday and that next to this one, there are 2 more to come. You can register for the upcoming webinars via our website, fleeteurope.com. Today, we are going to talk about the right infrastructure for your EV fleet, and apparently, this is really an important topic. Recently, Fleet Europe, together with connectivity specialist Geotab, launched an electric and connected survey, and based on the answers, and you see it on your screen, we asked what are the biggest concerns, barriers regarding fleet electrification. And so we give a list of options, and apparently charging infrastructure is the top 1 priority in terms of possible hurdle to implement EVs. And so we hope that today, together with the experts, we can give you a little bit more insight in how to overcome this challenge and how for you it can be still feasible to implement electric vehicles linked to an efficient charging infrastructure. Today's webinar is filled with different experts. We will start with a view about the European charging infrastructure by our automotive and new energies journalist, Dieter Kwartier, followed by a discussion that I will have with the European fleet manager of Infor, Ver der Wort, who has a striking view on electric vehicles and also the charging infrastructure. And we will end the expert presentations with insights from our supporting partner ALD, together with ChargePoint, about how to manage the charging infrastructure and what they can do for your fleet in terms of charging. Very important to know is that, ladies and gentlemen, you can ask your questions to our experts by sending your questions via the chat function in the webinar tool. And at the end of the webinar, we will have a Q&A session together with all experts. So if you have a question for the experts, then you can send it via the chat function of the tool. So, ladies and gentlemen, let's kick off this new webinar of the Virtual Fleet Week with first an introduction about the charging infrastructure in Europe, given by our journalist, Dieter Kwartier. Dieter, welcome. Welcome again.
Hi, Steven. Hi, everyone. And indeed, it's a pleasure to be in this webinar and shed a light on the European public charging infrastructure as we can find it today and as we may find it tomorrow. So, as we all know, the European public charging network is quite diverse. It's kind of a patchwork, and it's kind of a complex thing. It's not a homogeneous union, I would say. it has come a long way, but it still also has a long way to go, as you will see in the upcoming slides. It is unevenly spread. You all know, of course, that in countries like the Netherlands, Norway, Germany, France, the UK, it's a different story than, for instance, in Croatia or other Eastern European countries. So there's an uneven spread of the network. It is also a patchwork of operators, and that makes it really difficult for fleet managers to manage costs and manage contracts and suppliers. But of course, there are solutions out there, which I'm happy to briefly explain to you. And as a fourth item in this short overview, I would like to highlight that there's also different charging standards, making it a bit more difficult and complex than it already is. And then finally, a big exclamation mark I should like to put behind this is the price variation that exists today in the public charging network, making it really difficult to manage charging costs on a public network. Next slide. So here you can see a few graphs that paint a picture of today's situation in Europe. As you can see, we have come a long way from just a few thousand public charging points 10 years ago. We are now actually at about 200,000 charging points across Europe. That is excluding Norway, by the way. This is the European Union. And of course, the majority of these charging points are what we call regular or semi-fast chargers up to 22 kilowatts. And the minority are the rapid chargers, like the ones you find in the Ionity network and Tesla supercharging, etc. So we have come a long way, but we still have to expand this network a lot more, as you will see in one of the upcoming slides. The slide on the right side shows the number of charging points per 100 kilometers of motorway in the EU. And that again shows a positive picture in the sense that there's a lot more charging points out there since a couple of years. And this will, of course, expand further in the future. Next slide. This is an interesting one. Here you see the evolution of the number of plug-in vehicles, so both plug-in hybrids or electric vehicles, per charging point in the EU. It used to be quite high, and then it came down a bit. How is that possible? Well, the explanation is quite simple. In the beginning, of course, there were not that many PHEVs and EVs around, so meaning that the number of PHEVs or EVs per charging point was quite high. And then, of course, the EV sales and PHEV sales started to rise, and well, the charging network had to keep up. So that's what you see in this graph. On the right-hand side, you see the top 5 lowest number of PHEVs or EVs per charging point. And interestingly, you see Latvia, you see Slovakia, you see Croatia, you see Slovenia. You might think, wow, these countries, they are well ahead in terms of charging infrastructure. Well, actually, it's not the case. It's just because they have a very low number of PHEVs and EVs on their roads as well. So if you see the number 3 here in the case of Latvia, that doesn't mean that there's a huge public charging network. No, it basically means that they have a very low number of plug-in vehicles on their roads, related to also a quite low number of public chargers. So this graph basically shows that you can prove anything with statistics, if you like. The one that really is relevant here, of course, is the Netherlands. The Netherlands has both a very large public charging network and a very large number of plug-in vehicles, of course. Next slide. If we look at the absolute numbers in terms of public charging points in the EU, then the Netherlands is absolutely number 1. That's no surprise, followed by France, Germany, Italy, and Sweden. What's remarkable here, that of the more or less 200,000 public charging points, 90% is located in these top 5 countries. Only 10% is outside this top 5 countries. So that means that indeed the density is very different amongst the European countries. By 2030, we will have more or less 44 million electrified vehicles on our roads, so vehicles with a plug. And that means that the infrastructure needs to keep up, well, actually needs to out-accelerate this growth rate in EV sales. Otherwise, we will have a problem. So to avoid an infrastructure bottleneck, Transport and Environment reckons that the EU needs an additional 1.3 million charging points by 2025 and a total of 3 million charging points by 2030, which will cost the EU about 20 billion euros spread over the next 10 years. So that means that we have to expand the public charging point 15 times compared to today's numbers. That's of course a very impressive number. Next slide. So instead of one unified charging network, we also have, of course, our national charging networks, and even the national grid is not operated by one party. It's actually a patchwork in each country as well. So the grids are operated nationally, and even in the countries themselves, there is a patchwork or a different combination of operators. And this multitude of providers, well, they offer a jungle of apps and cards and rates and subscriptions. So it's quite a jungle out there. And that makes the life of a European fleet manager not easier, to say the least. According to a study by Total, there are about 1,000 charge point operators in Europe and 600 e-mobility service providers. So that's painting a rather disturbing picture of the European public charging network. But fortunately, there are solutions out there to make charging easier and to have a roaming possibility, which I will explain just a bit later on. So in short, it's impossible for fleet managers to conclude contracts with each one of these EMSPs, and we need interoperability across Europe. And basically we need roaming, so contracts between the different operators and service providers, so that one charging app or one charging card gives access to the entire network. And these solutions, they exist. Next slide. Fourth issue, I would say, is that we also have different charging standards in Europe. For AC charging, so the slow to medium fast charging, that's not too much of a problem. We usually use the Type 2 plug, and well, each plug-in vehicle comes with its own cable, so that's not really an issue. Maybe the biggest issue is the fact that in DC fast charging or rapid charging up to 350 kilowatts, that there we have 3 types of protocol. We have the CHAdeMO, the Japanese standard basically, which is still used by Nissan with the Leaf and the NV200. And then the upcoming CCS, the combined charging standard, which is used by most Western European car manufacturers. And there's also the standard provided by the Ionity network. And then, of course, we all know the supercharger network by Tesla, which unfortunately is not open to non-Tesla drivers. And that makes it, of course, yeah, a bit difficult. It would be great if Tesla would open up its network to non-Tesla drivers, but that does not seem to be the case for just now. Next slide. So, and a final element, there's a huge price variation, which of course threatens the TCO of an electric vehicle. The price variation is many times greater than with petrol or diesel. You can charge for free at some semi-public charges. On average, the price is about 25 cents. But a quick research learns that in Europe you find rates that vary between 15 cents all the way up to 79 cents, and that's the price that is you have to pay at a Ionity fast charger if you don't have a subscription. So that means that, well, the price difference between 15 cents and 79 cents, that's the same as paying diesel €1 at one pump and €7 at a different pump. So you can imagine that this seriously threats the costs of an EV, and is something you should really be attentive about. Another difficulty in the public charging network is that some providers, they use a kilowatt hour as a calculation basis. Other charge you per minute connected. Other use a fixed rate for a session. At some charges, you really even have to pay an idling fee if you keep your vehicle at the charging point without actually charging. So these are also aspects that make it complicated, and indeed might make it really expensive. It's also difficult to control if your employees have a roaming card allowing you to charge everywhere. So let's say you have a plug surfing or an EV box or another charge point card, doesn't matter. These cards give you access to basically hundreds of thousands of charging points without you having the control as a fleet manager on which, let's say, charging point they're using. So you don't have an immediate control on the cost of these charging points. So that is something that you should be wary about. But then again, solutions are in the making for this. And then finally, again, fast charging is expensive. Unless you have a subscription. So here again, it's a matter of looking what the possibilities are, contacting your leasing partner, and see what solutions are out there to make sure that you have the best possible rates and the best possible subscription program that suits your fleet needs. And that's it from my side. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dieter. Thank you for bringing some insight in the charging infrastructure in Europe. If you have a question for Dieter, please send it via the chat function, and at the end of this webinar, we will moderate a little Q&A with the experts. For you also, if you would like to know next to the Virtual Fleet Week more about electrification, then we can recommend that you read our latest magazine. So our Fleet Europe magazine, it's called the European Guide to Fleet Electrification. And in there, we are not only talking about the newest electric vehicle models, but also about issues around total cost of ownership and charging. So you can order it on our website, fleeteurope.com. Let's get on with the second expert speaker. And of course, it's always interesting to share some best practice insights. And that's why we have invited Fer der Wort. He is the European Fleet Manager at Infor, and he has quite a vision around electric vehicles. And if I'm not mistaken, Mr. Fer der Wort, you are driving yourself an electric vehicle. Is that correct?
That's correct, Steven. Almost 2 years I'm now driving with an electrical vehicle, and faced some nice challenges and opportunities when traveling with a car through Europe, which is only equipped with a battery. But until so far, no major issues passed by.
Okay, perfect. So you are in the perfect position also then to give a testimonial. We prepared some questions. You will have the backup with some slides. And so I would like to start with the first question. For the people that might not know Fer der Wort and Infor, can you briefly explain what your company is about and also what kind of vehicle fleet you have at the moment?
Sure. Infor is a global leader in business cloud software products for companies, industries, and specific markets. We are serving 67,000 customers based in 178 different countries. We have in total 140 offices located in 44 countries, and we have a total number of staff globally of 17,000 people. Since 2020, Info became a wholly owned standalone subsidiary of Koch Industries. In the second slide, I can show you what we did. In 2010, we have implemented one European car policy, making use of one lease vendor and one OEM single source supplier to our entire fleet in Europe. This scheme was also rewarded in 2014 with a third prize at the Fleet Europe event in Hamburg. From the 1,400 employees eligible currently for vehicle benefit, we have approximately 1,000 company car drivers, and we're offering company cars in 14 different countries in Europe, where we're making use also of the same brand and same car policy and same vendor. In the past years, we have started to investigate adding the electrical charging of vehicles, and electrical charging of vehicles is battery vehicle, but also plug-in hybrids, into our fleet program, which resulted that we will offer those kind of vehicles besides our normal combustion engines we are providing in the upcoming year 2021. The reason why 2021 has to do that our main supplier is now starting distributing the electrical vehicles in the first range. Next week we will receive the first batch in the Netherlands. So the charging was already part of a kind of an investigation and challenge, where we will offer starting I think in 2022 when the availability through our eligibility scheme can offer at least 1 or 2 electrical vehicles per level. This was all planned pre-COVID. It will not change the rollout of the electrical vehicles in our scheme, but it will question if it will still be welcome to provide vehicles into our fleet through Europe. But it's a different kind of a discussion, but it's also in our mind.
Okay.
Hopefully it was the introduction of Infor.
Good, thank you very much. Very interesting that, of course, the decision already was taken before, let's say, the outbreak of COVID-19, and that the pandemic has not changed plans when it comes to fleet electrification. We indeed see that perhaps this is a good starting point for new initiatives such as fleet electrification. And what I would like to know, Fek, from you is, what are the main reasons for you to adopt electric vehicles in your European fleet? And can you also stipulate a bit what kind of vehicles you are thinking about?
Now that's also mentioned a bit on the next slide. Now there are multiple reasons, and I made a quick kind of a summary. The reasons we have is for example CO2 emission. CO2 emission equals in Europe a kind of tax payment. That means when you reduce the CO2 or you can make it stable, you can predict and forecast your expenses quite easy. Also the environmental social governance commitments are playing a role in here. We want to be a good employer for our own stakeholders, but also outside Infor. On the other hand, we are facing also some challenges in cities like in Oslo, in Stockholm, Paris is announced, in London, in Munich, in Stuttgart, where we are facing eco zones or in principle city bans. That will be the next step. Paris 2023, historical center. They want to get rid of the cars with a combustion engine. So that makes you also think of how can we secure traveling into those areas. On the other side, it's the expenses. We have got the charging of car taxes based on CO2. That's in all countries. If you take France or you take Belgium, the Netherlands, and Germany, everything is related now to the CO2. That can be in purchase price of the vehicle, but it can also be in operational taxes. That means you prediction of your expenses. Read all the forecasts for your budget, it's getting complicated. On top of that is the taxation additional of fuel. They want to raise the fuel price, diesel and petrol, to gain an additional income for the government, but to increase also your expenses. So The last item, but that's not one of the things I would say this is a real trigger. You got no governmental incentives like eco bonuses, like purchase bonuses on charging stations, but on home premises, but office premises. Benefiting kind advantages for staff, a reduction in VAT, but it's temporary. So what we did is we make use of them as long as they are there. But when they are not there, we can still offer cars into the same eligibility scheme we have in place. That brought to the car choice. One of the most important things we have in car choice has also to do with the eligibility scheme we have in our company. Everyone eligible for the vehicle benefit is driving 20,000 kilometers business or more. That means you have to have a decent range. We'll not say that everyone is driving a long distance every day, but when it's there, when it's needed, that they don't have to pull over every high power charging station to charge up the vehicle, but that they can rely on, I've got a car which can use 300 kilometer minimum, and that's beyond WLTP, including RDE, in wintertime, that they can drive the distance. Other side, what is important is charging. We all know what happened with the Jaguar E-Pace. There's only one phase AC charging. That means with a battery of 90 kilowatts, it will take 2 days before the battery is completed. Every car needs to have the possibility to charge with 3-phase EC. That means at home 7.2 to 11 kilowatts. That overnight, when you charge your car, the battery is full. And the highest possible high power charging on highway when it's needed to avoid long charging times. When someone is ready for 2 hours charging up the car, is costing more money than paying the additional fee for the current at the high power charging station. Purchase price is also one of the items which is important. Electrical vehicles are more expensive than cars with a combustion engine. When I take a Volkswagen ID3, it will cost 45k. When I take a Volkswagen Golf 1.5 DSG, it will cost 33k. Meaning my lease expenses will be higher. So we compare it on the total cost of use of the vehicles, where we are saving on charging of the vehicle. And that's one of the reasons we say, okay, charging is one of the key elements adopting or implementing your electrical cars in your scheme. And last but not least, I think is also the driver satisfaction. A new EV will have not the same driver experience compared to a car with a combustion engine. So the real petrol heads, you have to convince them that this electrical vehicle is one, when you want to pedal to the metal, that's quicker than a car with a petrol or diesel engine, but it's also really comfortable. So that brought us on getting some triggers to see this is the reason that we can adopt electrical vehicles into our scheme.
Okay, perfect. Now coming to the charging infrastructure, what kind of charging infrastructure do you have in place? You drive yourself an electric vehicle, and what kind of infrastructure do you envision, let's say, for your drivers in the future? Home charging, office charging, can you elaborate a little bit on that?
Yeah, it's when I speak for myself, when I started driving an electrical vehicle, there was a jungle on hardware offers. And I just selected one where I said, make it a combination and this is was a pilot. I got solar panels. When the sun is shining, I can put my power back on the grid, but I can also use it charging my vehicle. And to go ahead in the future, when my car is not in use and it's connected to the grid, it should be giving power off to my household. And that's when we come to cost neutral, or when you come to carbon neutral home setting. So I'm a bit further than what is the standard. When I take the charging, it's everything has to do when you got an electrical vehicle, you have a cable, and you have to put the cable somewhere in a plug. And that's one of the things you have to secure for your drivers. Otherwise, it will be a disaster implementing the electrical vehicles. So we first started to check on when we offer the cars, who and what is possible on hardware and what will it be costing. On the other side, we said, okay, you got home charging, you got office charging, you got public charging and transit charging. And we defined all 4 separately. So home charging, we said, is one of the things the driver needs to have definitely. And that means that it should be 50%. The reason why is also what Dieter mentioned. It's all to do with the expenses. You have to make a return of investment calculation on your home charging device, but also when you look at the power outcome at the driver's home of the home premises from staff, is the cheapest way of charging your vehicle besides the office charging. So home charging is important, that we said we facilitated 100%. 100% means with a standard installation, standard equipment. We've got people living in a premises where you the house needs to be available equipment that you can implement that. So the second one is when we take it on an office charging. Office charging, when we take the industrial rate of current, that's really low. So, okay, this is the second step, that we have to make sure that on the premises we've got also an office charging available. As the pricing is again the calculation of return on investment for the facility that you purchase the goods, also calculate how many charging stations you need. So in principle, what we did is, let's do the following. Let's take the 11 kilowatts home charging providing to our staff. Let it run into a combination with our lease vendor, with our supplier. Agree also on a charging card reimbursement. On the office, we said, okay, let's see how many cars do we have normally in an office situation. Again, it's pre-COVID. Today is different, as a lot of offices are not used at the moment, but calculate how many cars you have normally at the parking, and what will it cost, and what period will you earn the investment back. We made a calculation in one of the premises in the Netherlands. We said, okay, when we take 6 to 12 charges on the parking lot, with the number of vehicles increasing over time, it will be a return on investment within 24 months. And the reason why, it's you're charging for a really low rate. That's the key point. That's my total cost is low. Now, that brings me to the last one. When you take public charging and transit charging, we try to limit it as much as possible. In some cases, we cannot avoid it. We have got people living in an apartment. They don't have got any place of installing a charging device at home. So we are trying to, we made an agreement with our supplier that he also assisting on installing public charging places at nearby where the employee is living, together with City Hall and local governments, where we got also the access also to a lower rate. The last one is the public charging highway, high power charging. We try to demote that as much as possible. When it's needed, you can use it for long distance, but that's one of the things we said, let's take that as low as possible.
Okay. Coming then next to the charging infrastructure, to the possible challenges that you might see related to charging. What are some kind of challenges that you say, probably these are the ones that I need to encounter in the upcoming period to make sure that the drivers that we give an electric vehicle and are eligible for an electric vehicle can also charge in the most efficient way?
Now, the biggest challenge we had is when we take the home charging. And when I take the Netherlands, Dieter also mentioned in the Netherlands we got the most public charging facilities as possible. And the public is also charging systems which are placed at the home premises from people. They also are counted into the public charging station in some cases. When I take the standard situation into the home premises, is the electricity system in the house sufficient to install a 3-phase charging system? That's one of the key items. And the most modern houses, they can support that, but we also people living in an old farm or living in the middle of nowhere. It's also possible in the Netherlands, where the power outlet of the system is not sufficient enough to support the 11 kilowatts charger. That's one of the challenges we had. But with the energy supplier, but also the supplier of our hardware, I think we can conquer that in 95 of all cases. The Netherlands. When I go outside the Netherlands, it will be more complicated, where 3-phase charging in the Netherlands is quite common. The more I go to the south of Europe, the more difficult it will be. So there are lying some real challenges. The other item is, and that's one thing which is also keen to keep in mind, we have to follow some, again, the GDPR and also the privacy legislation. And you have to imagine that someone has got a home charging device and he will reimbursed by the supplier for the current he's using for the company car. And the reimbursement, there's privacy sensitive information spread to several parties to make this happen. So we have to close that gap also. So legal is also involved to get this closed. The office charging, that was not some small challenges, but also some big challenges, where you got the luck in one of the premises that we have got a server room which was no longer in use, so the power was almost there. That means the cable connected to our charging stations was not that long, and this was not, took not that much effort to dig a deep hole to get it installed. But when I take premises in Paris, that's a leased building, we have to involve the landlord. And the landlord is saying, yeah, you can do that, but you have to make use of this energy supplier. No, we take our own supplier. No. This is the supplier. So the landlord has also made a deal with a supplier of the hardware and software, but also the current in our Paris building. And that's not only in Paris, there's also in the other countries where I'm facing such kind of issues. So that's a real challenge to get your office-based charging installed. All has to do with it costs money. You have to earn it back in one way. So you can say, okay, let's put it in and see where it ends. Then it will be a no-go. The easiest and quickest one is the transit charging. It's also the most expensive, but we made a deal with one of the suppliers. Say, okay, we want to make use of your network. Dieter mentioned roaming. Now, roaming is indeed very important, as you can agree on a reduced rate. When they take a reduced rate, and he mentioned, for example, the Audi the e-tron card or the Kia card or whatever card, you can access a certain network also from Ionity. Then instead of 80 cents per kilowatt hour, you're paying 30 cents per kilowatt hour. So we made a deal with to have got the largest network as possible, but also against a competitive rate where you can discuss and negotiate roaming. That brings to the area of the car supplier or the charging car supplier. What were the challenging over there? Also, DJ mentioned you charge your vehicle. It will be charged per minute, per hour, per kilowatt hour. You have to have got a starting fee. And most thing I hated myself. I had some abroad trips in Germany, in France, that you get your expenses coming in 6 or 7 months after you charge your vehicle. So it's very difficult to see, oh, was I there? What was the... You have to go back. It's difficult to monitor your behavior. So that's a real point of improvement, and I think it's going back in time. When we had the first fuel cards coming in, like Total or BP, you can only have got a limited network that you can fill up your car. I think 20 years ago, and now you got one card and you can cover entire Europe. So I think there's a real opportunity for the energy suppliers in combination with the European Union, but also with OEMs, to get one card where you can charge your vehicle. That's key. When you don't have got a decent card available, you will run into a problem. And especially people and staff, when I've got a conversation with staff, one thing is, how can I charge my vehicle? When can I charge my vehicle? It's not a range anxiety, but it's more where and when can I recharge my vehicle? So you have to secure your charging network. When this is secured, the implementation of ECVs will always be successful.
Okay, final question, and this will probably be a perfect bridge to our final experts in this webinar. The final question is around your expectations towards the fleet industry, the energy industry, in terms of supporting electric fleet implementation. What kind of expectations, what kind of needs do you have where you say, okay, it would be nice to see that this or that could be resolved?
Now, that's one of the key questions for the successfully of the introduction of electrical vehicles. And when I take my own experiences, when I got my EV delivered, I received the keys of the car, and here's the car. Okay, but how can you help me with charging? That's not in our portfolio. You have to sort this out yourself. So my key thing is, and I think here lies a responsibility with the OEMs, but also in combination with the energy companies and a decent car supplier. Dieter mentioned over 600 suppliers. I counted in the Netherlands 178 charging card suppliers and picked then the right one. So my expectation is similar to, for example, what a lease vendor is doing, is unburdening. So that means I've got a car, electrical vehicle, I got a card, I know I can charge my car everywhere. It's not against a competitive rate. And the competitive rate makes sure that I always have got access to to a large network of charging stations. And sure, when I have to pay more for high power charging, that's logical. And logical why? I need to have my car charged within a certain time span, and that will cost me then 20 minutes instead of 3 hours. And the 20 minutes, when you have to pay then 30, 40, or 50 cents per kilowatt hour, that's not of interest because it's not coming, it's not happening that frequently. Now, as the market, the energy market is really complicated, and yeah, I will say it old-fashioned. This will be a development which needs to be taking place in a very short notice, and I think this is really difficult. I spoke to Mike Holton in the UK, and he's one of the EV specialists over there, and he said we've got 15 main suppliers, we've got 15 different cards. But card of supplier A will not be accepted at supplier B. So you have 3, 4, 5, or 6 different cards. And when I take myself, I got 5 charging cards in my car. And filling up your car and charging your car in France, you were stopping at the péage, and then first card, no, second, no, third, no, fourth, this one is. And the next charging station is not card 4 which is working. Now you need card 1. So it's really. I think there's a lot of improvement to make, and I think this is the biggest hurdle to take. As when you have an energy company and you see E.ON, you see ENWB, Vattenfall, Clever, Go Fast, Fastnet to combine. And there, Dieter mentioned also, there is, for example, a real big positive example of Tesla. They've got a really good infrastructure. You don't need a card. Your car is your card. You come in, you plug your car in the fast charger, it will be, and you can continue your journey. And that's one of the things, and that's what I was expecting from my suppliers: unburden and make sure that we got a reliable charging network.
Okay, perfect. Thank you very much. Thank you, thank you for sharing your insights and also the plans you have with Infor. I wish you a lot of electric success. Let's make the bridge to the final presenters in this webinar. And these are Benjamin Huvet of ALD Automotive and André ten Bloemendaal of ChargePoint. Gentlemen, welcome in the webinar. Welcome also for supporting the virtual Fleet Week. You heard from a European fleet manager. Apparently, the appetite, the willingness to go EV is big, but there are still some questions, some hurdles. What is your answer, and how do you see, let's say, the EV charging infrastructure taking place in the future, and what could you mean for those international fleet managers? The floor is yours, gentlemen.
Thank you, Steven. Thank you very much. Yeah, as you mentioned, and the interview you made with Fer was very, very insightful and very interesting, and it's clearly a mirror of what we are seeing now on the market. It's that electrification has become a reality. I mean, it's not anymore a line in the strategic plan that you have on the PowerPoint during a meeting explaining should we go for electric or when we go for electric. Now it's how we should go and how we will deal with the electrification of our fleet. And the context and the current context is definitely showing an acceleration of this transition because you have the WLTP norm, you have the new targets settled by the European Union that are pushing the bounds of the OEMs and pushing them to launch more and more models and to sell more and more electrified models on the market. And then we had this very tough situation with the COVID-19, but which also pushed the local governments to develop some local incentives, some helps to support also the energetical transition. So we see this acceleration from a fleet perspective. We see more and more requests from our customers on that. And when we talk about EVs, obviously we need to talk about charging. And here, I mean, Andre, you will have the better knowledge than me on this topic because you are the specialist on this. But I think you are obviously seeing the same trends in the charging industry and the charging needs from the customers.
Absolutely right, Benjamin. And it's interesting to listen to the previous two gentlemen in this webinar as well, because I see a lot of questions raised by them that are actually already solved in the industry. So that's the good news. The good news is that if you look at the story that Fer told, all very recognizable, but in the past 2 years, because he speaks over the past 2 years that he has this experience and that they went through the pilots, in this past 2 years, a lot of things changed. And one of the things that changed is the whole standardization in languages that are being used between stations and EMSPs, so CPOs and EMSPs, all technical terms. And it's interesting that Ferm then makes the relation also to the price setting, and he uses then the reference to energy companies for setting a price. Well, interestingly enough, in general, energy companies are not at all involved in setting the price. It's the charge point owners and the charge point operators that set the price. And unfortunately, in this industry, then indeed you get to the EMSP, so the RFID cars, as far as referring it to, and they make a business model themselves, setting a price on top of the price that they pay to the CPOs. And then indeed you may end up in a situation that you can't recognize or even predict the price that you are going to pay. And you end up in a situation that you turn up at a gas station. Normally you would see a price per liter, you see how many liters you put in your car, you go inside and pay, and you pay the amount that is the P times Q, the number of liters times the price. In our industry, indeed, every now and then you still see that, you see the number of kilowatt hours or the number of minutes, and then you go inside, and depending on the card that you are going to use to pay, your price all of a sudden differs, which is kind of crazy. And I think that feeds back into our relationship, because we don't believe in that. We think that any driver should be able to predict what he's going to pay, and he should be able to turn up at any station. So two things that Fer said: I can't use my card at all the stations. Well, ALD has chosen for a partner that guarantees that you can. And secondly, that partner doesn't make a business model out of that EMSP bit. So we will charge only what is advertised on the station. And if nothing is advertised on the station, we will show what the station is, the station price is. So you see a lot of things there has happened. But coming back to what I see in this industry, I think what is very striking in the two presentations that we've seen, it's all about charging. Whereas we think it's all about parking, because there is a massive change between behavior of people in terms of a fuel car and a EV. And an EV car, in general, you charge when you park, and a fuel car, you refuel when your tank is empty. And the difference is that you have a long time on your car to get the energy in. So where we talk about fast charging and where we talk about charging on the go, in general, you will see, apart from when your mileage exceeds the capacity of your battery, you will see that your battery is charged while your car is being parked. And then indeed, it's either at the office or at home, where you completely control the pricing. So that's typically what we do, and that's typically how we support you, because we can offer both solutions completely GDPR compliant. And again, Fer made the right remark there, because it has to be GDPR compliant, completely GDPR compliant, as well as in the workplace. And the big advantage, if you make that one single ecosystem, is that you start controlling TCO, because you can predict what the costs are, you can minimize the cost, and looking at utilization. So how can I reduce the capex, make as much use as I can of the infrastructure? That kind of stuff is all catered in the solution that we bring. And we don't only bring the solution, but I think that's where we go hand in hand. We advise the customer where to go to, right?
Yeah, exactly. And I really like when you talk about prediction, because when we start, discussing with our customers on the electrification of the fleet, one of the key message and one of the key aspects of if we want to build a successful journey to electrification, is really to assess the driver usages, to understand also the business model of the company, to avoid any breakage in this business model and the activity of the company. But the fact that all the decisions that you are taking right now will have an impact on the next 3 to 4 years, because the average duration of a leasing contract is a 4-year duration. So it's a matter of understanding the needs, understanding the different usages of the driver, taking also into consideration the new normal with home office increase, but it's also anticipating the future and anticipating the future needs of your drivers, but also the future of the technologies and the future of the regulations that will be put in place in some cities, but also in some countries. And you have some example with the diesel ban, but also like in France, the government imposed the company since up to after 2021 to have at least 10% of the renewals with electric vehicles. And it's something that you have to anticipate. But you can, on our side, we anticipate this on the fleet itself, on the vehicles, on the different powertrains that we can provide in the mix of vehicles of our customers to optimize the TCO and the cost of the fleet. But I think, if we can show the slide that we have prepared, but Andre, you can drive us also on this slide to explain how anticipating the charging needs is also a key element of a success journey towards electrification of the fleet.
Yeah, thank you. And yes, absolutely, because it's interesting to see what is going on. And if you look at the electrification, let's be honest, in general, companies start with 2 or 4 or 6, whatever the fleet is, whether it's motor pool, whether it's delivery fleet, whether it's service fleet, whatever kind of fleet you have, you start with a few cars, and then you go into a pilot phase, and then you see how it's going on and whether it works for you, yes or no, and then it gradually grows. Interestingly enough, you are tempted, and we see that every day together, you are tempted to make a choice based on the situation today. And that's on the very left-hand side. So you talk about, I have a workplace or I have a depot. I need a charger. I have 2 cars. I have a number of drivers, which is not too big. I may have a supplier that wants to use it, yes or no. I may have employees that have already an EV or a PHEV that will use it. But it's all pretty contained and very overseeable. So what you're tempted to look at is cost of that single installation. What you will find out, however, is that in a number of years, and in this case, let's say it's 3 years, in a number of years, this all has grown. This has grown to much more stations, much more cars, utilization has grown, you may have more sites, you may have more use cases, and what have you. And all of a sudden, you start running into what we now call grid anxiety. In the past, we had range anxiety. Can I drive the number of miles that I would like to? Now you get to grid anxiety. Can I get enough power out of the grid? And that's typically happening because of the behavior that we all had pre-COVID, but it will still be the case when we return to normal, which is what we call the camel bump. People arrive at the office or at the premises at a certain time. Then you have parked your car for a number of hours, and then everybody returns home. And if you have home charging, then the charging cycle starts again. So there's two enormous bumps, and those bumps normally coincide with every kind of system starting up in your office or in your production environment. And that's not, we are not capable to cope with that in the grid. So what you need to do is mitigate that. So you get power management, you get utilization, you get a number of things that you want to change in order to facilitate that growth. And then you go to the next step, which makes it even more complicated, because then you really get into grid issues. Then you really have to extend your grid or do the grid extension if you're not very careful. You get a lot of things like maintenance, proactive maintenance, and you get in a situation which sometimes, particularly in depot charging, that's already earlier, that you get into the mission critical parts of your business, whereby you have to see to it that the cars are charged to a certain level to do what they have to do in the hours thereafter. Delivery fleet is the most simple example. You have to be able to do the tour that has been planned for. And that's where you get integration going on with telematics. Geotab was mentioned as a brand. You know, we integrate with them. You get into integration with BMSs, building management systems. You get into proactive maintenance. You get into planning systems. So all of a sudden, it becomes really, really complex. And the thing that is very important, and that's what I like about our cooperation, is that we can help your customers to start small, cheap and cheerful, agile at the left-hand side, but make the right decisions to grow and be able to get to year 5 without having to disinvest or make major investment in grid extensions and what have you. And, you know, be surprised, negatively surprised, unfortunately, then growing together with us. And, you know, I think that's where the success is in this cooperation.
Exactly. And just thanks, Andre. And to conclude, Steven, on the question also that you raised, I think that the combination of the strengths of our two companies, ALD and ChargePoint, and our expertise and knowledge is also one of the key assets of what we can bring to the customers, meaning a strong knowledge and capabilities to assess the best mix of powertrains in the fleet, combined with the best mix of charging solutions, and also to accompany those customers in their transition, not only on a one-shot approach, but on a long-term approach, and to ensure that this transition will be successful from a driver perspective, but also from a company perspective, financially speaking.
Okay, gentlemen, thank you. Thank you, Benjamin. Thank you, Andre. Thank you for the explanation. And I think that you have convinced quite a few of the viewers in this webinar of the capabilities of ChargePoint and ALD. Let's move on to the final part, a little Q&A round together with the experts. If you have a question, please use the chat function and we will moderate some of the questions. There are already some questions that have popped in. First one, and I'm going through the list of questions here, is for André ten Bloemendal. André, how many kilowatt hour are used for an average workplace charging session per car? Is there an estimation that you can give, or is that not possible?
Yeah, absolutely it is. It is pretty straightforward. So if you have workplaces where you have your employees that have an average commute is about 25 to 30 kilometers single way. Divide that by 5 kilometers to the kilowatt hour, you get to around 6 kilowatt hours per session for commute. If you take the example of Fer, where he said, you know, our average is 20,000 kilometers a year, take 220 working days, you get to 90 kilometers a day, divide it again by 5, you are at 18 kilowatt hours per day. So it's somewhere between there.
Okay, perfect. Question for Verder Wort. Ver, in the setup, the choice that you are making around charging, electrification, do you also take into account how the production of electricity is made, is produced?
Yeah, good question. In theory, no. But I think in reality that it will be a mix of gray and green, gray of green output. But it's depending on you got the supplier of the grid and you've got the agreement with your energy supplier. But it's depending what your supplier is doing. When I take now what was lately in the past week in the Netherlands in the news, we've got Vattenfall. Vattenfall has created a wind park, good for 270,000 households, but no one is benefiting from it as Microsoft is using it for the entire server center they are hosting in the Netherlands. But it is what the energy supplier is offering. But it can be when we take home premises. That can be when an employee has got making use of pure energy or green energy, then it's 100% green energy as far as we can define. But for the company premises, it is different.
Okay, good. Andre, again for you, is it recommendable to forbid, for example, to employees to use DC or fast charging to limit, let's say, the costs that you might have, so the expenses?
Let me answer that in a different way and then give it to Benjamin, who does that type of advice more than we do. So my part of the answer would be, we can give access or deny access to those kind of stations, and that can be done by the fleet manager. What we can also do is we can provide what we call a wallet. So what you can say is you get 20 euros a month, which you can spend on public charging. After that, you have to pay yourself, because otherwise you would have just done it at the workplace or at your house. So technically, we can support it. On the advice part, Benjamin, you probably can answer that better.
Yeah, thanks, Andre. I think this question, is it really depends on what are you looking for. I mean, is it really to cut from the energy consumption, or is it or do you really want to promote electrification of your fleet? I mean, the question could be raised also on the thermic engines. I mean, do you forbid the access to fuel station on the motorway? That's also the same question. Because the price on the motorway of a liter of fuel is much more expensive than the one that you can find in the supermarkets or other networks. So my advice would be no, because if you do that, you will limit the range of action of your drivers. So, and the price of electricity being, even in the supercharger network, being less expensive than the cost of fuel, I mean, I would not go in this direction, because the driver might be a little bit blocked to switch to electric vehicles if they don't see a full commitment from the employers to cover the electricity price and the charging cost.
I think you're on mute, Steven.
Steven, you're on mute.
Yes, sorry. Question for Fer. Do you provide cash allowance for the drivers installing home charging, or is it built in the leasing arrangement that you are having, and how do you reimburse the electricity cost of home charging afterwards?
In principle, what we're doing is we facilitate up to a base installment, but also the hardware to the driver. And the reason why is that the conditions we agreed with the supplier has got a benefit in purchase. That's one. The employee can, however, also mention, okay, my neighbor can facilitate this and I want to have a cash compensation. Then we say, that's fine. Now, is this a part of the lease? Yes and no. We've got a budget for the leases for the vehicles. I got on top a budget on the charging facility. As there can be, for example, people living in an apartment, and we cannot facilitate anything. That means it would be unfair to use the same budget for everyone equal. So that's why we split it up. So when possible, we facilitate everything, and that will be then included in our lease amount. Or when someone says, I want to do it myself, we will compensate him and reimburse him for the expenses made. But for the base installation, when we have to change the complete electric system in his house, that's excluded. So we need to have a quote coming in from the hardware, from connection into the grid box of the premises, into up to the standard installation. It doesn't matter if it's 10-meter diggings with cable or 15 meters. We don't look at 50 or 100 euro difference, but it is in principle what is offered. I got now a request running from a guy. He's got a driveway and he wants the installation in one of his sheds, and that's 100 meter. I said, now 100 meter, start digging, and I think when the car is coming, he will be ready. We will not compensate that. So we draw a line, but it's two-way.
Okay. A question for André. André, no, sorry. A question for Benjamin. And the question is related to one of the things that I wrote down. Sorry. Yes, is there somehow, let's say, a limit to which you recommend to your customers what kind of drivers in terms of mileage are suitable for an EV? For example, drivers that do 35 or 40,000 K a year, are they, in your opinion, still okay to drive an electric vehicle, or perhaps even more suitable to drive an electric vehicle?
Yeah, so I would answer it depends. It depends on the usage. I mean, it depends on what kind of kilometers are we talking about. I mean, is it more urban kilometers or is it more highways kilometers? It's very different. But what we see now is that there is an increase of this, let's say, yearly kilometer breakdown compared to what was true even 2 years ago, where we were advising 15,000–20,000 kilometers per year as a maximum. Now the technology is improving, the range of the vehicle is increasing, and as Dieter and André mentioned, the charging network is also increasing a lot. So we don't see any huge blockers to move to electric. It really depends on the usage. If you have people driving all day long because they are going from a meeting to another, obviously electric might not be the right solution. But if they drive like 30–35,000 kilometers a year, it's manageable with an electric vehicles without any problem.
Okay. Final question is for André. I found the question again. So the question is, André, typically Salesforce people are often the largest fleet population in a company. But they can charge at home, but as they will be often not in the office, they have limited options to charge at the office. We have seen, not only today, but also yesterday, that a good combination of office charging and home charging is probably the best solution in terms of cost efficiency. Is there a recommendation that you have for fleet managers with quite a large sales population where they cannot charge at the office because they are not there, and to still have that cost efficiency, let's say, in charging?
It's an interesting question, and it ties back into what is public charging and what is semi-public charging. And I think we talk here about semi-public charging, and there are even governments that really promote this semi-public charging, which means that you have at workplaces chargers that are open for suppliers, for customers, and what have you. In this case, a salesperson is a supplier to another company. So if he can charge at that other company's office, that would be perfect. And you see that particularly in countries where you have a higher penetration, there is mixed use stations at offices. So there is behind the fence, as we call it, which is dedicated to their own staff or service fleet or what have you. And then there is mixed use, which is generally semi-public. So it's not public, because as a private person, you can't drive into that parkway and then charge your car. But semi-public, once you are in that parking, you can select a station, or even, and that is increasingly also possible, you can reserve a station. So you can say, hey, I have an appointment with this, that, or the other. I reserve my parking anyway. So you have to be acknowledged as somebody who can park there that day. You arrive there, you have a reserved parking and a reserved station, and you can charge. That is really a normal thing where you get to higher penetrations. And then if you look at the number of hours that a salesperson on average is in the car versus that he is at the customer side, you still see no problem whatsoever.
Okay, thank you.
Steven, maybe one adding is when you select a vehicle with a certain range, that will be covering a lot, covering also the issue, the public of the transit charging near highways. So what Andre is mentioning, you can charge at the customer side, but when you got a car with a range up to 300, and I think even the newest cars coming up for 400 to 500 kilometers net, you can drive one day on one battery and charge it at your customer side. I think this is also one thing which is really important to add. That's why you have the combination between charging and charging infrastructure, public and semi-public charging, but also the car choice. And pricing of cars is getting lower.
Okay, perfect. Gentlemen, Benjamin, Andre, and Fer, thank you very much. Thank you for the expertise. A message to my colleague, Dieter, our journalist. Dieter, André ten Bloemendaal was mentioning when the expert talk of ALD and ChargePoint was starting that he, of course, is recognizing the questions that you and Fer were raising, but apparently a lot has been resolved. Between the lines, I read them that communication needs to be better. So communication probably from the industry itself, but also we have a role to play. And so we can, of course, also in the future, Dieter, bring interesting articles, interviews, and insights around fleet electrification and charging, and that is what we are going to do. So, gentlemen, thank you very much. Thank you for the support. And if we look a little bit at what is still on the plate for this week, then we have 2 more webinars. Tomorrow, there will be one around innovation and innovative solutions that can help the mobility sector, supported by Octo. And on Friday, we have electric vehicle implementation with SAP, and that webinar is supported by Webfleet Solutions. I would like to thank again ALD and ChargePoint for their support. And I think that we had a great webinar. The webinar will be recorded, will also be put online, so you can relive this webinar. And don't forget to follow fleeteurope.com for more information and expertise about electrification. Thank you and bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank
Thank you. Bye-bye.